Joining me now to understand a little bit more about what might be coming our way when the provincial budget is announced on Wednesday is Simon Enoch, who is with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Simon, the Premier signaled a shift today in taxation that could be announced on Wednesday. He said there might be an increase to the PST. That's something that's a consumption tax, and this shift towards consumption taxes, what exactly does that mean for the people at home?
Well, a consumption tax, as you mentioned, is the provincial sales tax. It's a 5% currently, and it would be applied to pretty much all commodities. Some commodities are exempted, I believe children's clothing, books, things like that. But if the Premier is leaning towards shifting the tax burden from an income tax to a consumption tax, he's effectively moving from the more progressive income tax to a much more regressive consumption tax. And the reason why most people consider consumption taxes to be regressive is because they disproportionately burden the poor. The poor are going to spend the majority of their money on taxable goods and services, so a far greater proportion of their income is going to go to taxes than a wealthier person would.
Why do you think the provincial government would take this approach?
Well, I mean, the thing about a sales tax is it's a good way to raise a lot of money quickly, but it's not the most equitable. So if the government, I hope the government recognizes the fundamental inequity of a higher consumption tax and really seriously considers some sort of provincial sales tax rebate program, not unlike we have with the GST. Because otherwise you're really asking the poorest in the province to pay the burden for the government's deficit.
And tell me more about why that is, why that burden would fall on the poor with these
well,
types
I
of
mean,
taxes.
okay. So the government has, it's implementing taxes and it's implementing revenue generation through taxes, right? We know that disproportionately social programs are relied upon by mid to lower income people. They don't have the money for private alternatives, so they rely most on social programs. So if you're cutting those things, that's going to disproportionately impact mid to lower income people. Now you're asking them to also bear the brunt of tax increases. So I think you're giving them a double whammy here. They're being asked to bear the brunt of the cuts and the brunt of the tax increases. And to me, that doesn't seem like a balanced approach.
But isn't it up to everyone to choose what they spend money on? And so if you don't want to buy something, if you don't want to eat out at that restaurant, then you don't have to. That's a choice that we all make.
Absolutely, but with the sales tax, we all have to buy things to stay alive, whether that's groceries, whether that's transit passes, whatever. And sure, certain things are exempt. We don't know if any of those exemptions are going to be lifted. But I think that a consumption tax is probably the most inequitable way to raise money. There are other ways to raise money for the province that would be much more progressive.
Could you give a few examples of that?
Yes. Introducing a high wage earner new tier. So high wage earners, say above $250,000. Currently, we only have 3 tiers of income tax. So if you created a 4th tier, incomes above $250,000, you could do that. We could restore the small business tax. It currently sits at 2%. It's one of the lowest in the country. We could raise that.
What is a PST rebate? How does that work?
Well, so I think if the government understands that this is kind of an inequitable approach, the best way to remedy that would be to create a provincial sales tax rebate system, not unlike certain people get the GST rebate. So recognizing that this tax is going to disproportionately burden low-income people, so they still pay it, but every month or every quarter they get a check back that tries to ameliorate some of the costs to them.
Thanks for your time today, Simon.
You're very welcome.